For 31 years, my life as an undocumented immigrant has been a problem waiting to be solved. Finally, I have what some might call a solution, albeit temporary, partial, and at the whim of a new administration and president who built his whole campaign around deportations. Since sharing my story very publicly in an essay in the New York Times some 13 years ago, the question I get asked the most all over the country from Americans of all backgrounds is, why don't you just get legal? Why don't you just fix this thing?
You got your papers?
What if I told you I didn't?
Well, then you need to get your ass on then. That's what I'd say.
Are you in line? Do you have your
No, but sir, there's no line. I was brought here when I was 12.
Yeah.
I didn't know I didn't have papers since I was 16. My grandparents, who are American citizens, didn't tell me. So I've been here.
Yeah.
I've been paying taxes since I was 18. If you're here who's undocumented, there's no way for you to get in the process.
Therefore, go to Mexico. You would be.
I'm Filipino.
Lying about being a United States citizen, falsely claiming citizenship, is considered one of the highest offenses under immigration law. I didn't know that when I was 19 years old, about to graduate from Mountain View High School, desperate to get a job, to make a living, to make something out of myself. So to get a job as a copy boy, answering the phones, delivering faxes and mail to staff, considered a low position in the newsroom of the San Francisco Chronicle, I lied on the employment form and checked the US citizen box. I remember convincing my 19-year-old self that I would earn that box. Checking that box, falsely claiming citizenship, would haunt me for decades. It is one of the main reasons why I couldn't just change my status. Not through marrying a US citizen, not through applying for, say, an employment-based visa, given my skills as a journalist, author, and media strategist. And when DACA was announced, thanks to the work of immigration rights activists, particularly dreamers like my dear friend Gabby Pacheco, I was 3 months too old to qualify.
So the good news is that at 9:30 tomorrow it'll be announced that dreamers, as defined by the 2010 bill that passed the House of Representatives, will be able to apply for deferred action, which is protection against deportation and work permits. Probably more than 1 million people will get status. The bad news is that the people who are going to be eligible have to be 29 or under. Yeah.
I've spent the past 10 years, a decade marked by the rise of Donald Trump and immigration being in the headlines almost daily, coming to terms with what it means to be undocumented, being hyper aware of certain legal limitations while reminding myself that creatively, I'm free. I can write a book. I can help produce a Broadway musical. I can start and lead an organization called Define American. As much as possible, I will not allow limitations to limit me. Then this past summer, as I was struggling to finish a book project, I got a call from Gabby. The Biden administration announced a policy update to an existing waiver called the D3 waiver. Some lawyers have called it the God waiver because it can waive even false claims to US citizenship. The policy update applied to people who receive college degrees in the US, allowing them to obtain employment-based temporary visas at a US consulate abroad and then re-enter the US in valid status with work authorization. If you've lived in the country as an undocumented immigrant for more than a year, you cannot leave the US without facing a 10-year bar to re-entry. D3, this God waiver, can also waive that bar. To be honest, I was skeptical. The promise of something like DACA was being dangled in front of me again. Then another dear friend named Moni, who spent decades as an immigration lawyer, asked to meet me while I was in Chicago finishing book reporting during the Democratic National Convention. Sitting on her backyard porch, she pitched me an idea. Apply for an O1 visa, a visa for workers with extraordinary ability, with the D3 waiver. Now, I could have applied for a work visa for either an H-1B or an O1 visa earlier, but the false claim and 10-year bar prevented that. Now, Moni said, I had a realistic opportunity to change my immigration status, to do something about my condition. This was months before the election, and there were high-level Biden administration officials who developed this policy update, hoping that folks like me who are eligible could benefit from it. This opportunity, Moni pointed out, comes with a massive risk: self-exile from the country I regard as my home. Following this process meant attending an interview at a U.S. consulate in a foreign country, in this case, Mexico. It meant being prepared that if it does not work out, if the waiver is denied, I would not be allowed to return to the United States. For days, I grappled with this idea, knowing how worried my family and friends have been for my safety, especially with the possibility of Trump back in the White House. Like many immigrant families, I come from a family of gamblers, and coming to the United States is a gamble. Gambling on my life is why I'm here, and gambling on my life is how I hope to stay here. So by September, the O visa process was in motion.
And to be honest, I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. The government now says I'm extraordinary, whatever that means. And now I will have a 3-year visa to be able to stay in the U.S. with some status, a status that I haven't had since I arrived in the U.S. 31 years ago, this past August. To be honest, I'm a little disoriented, excited, confused, scared. I just arrived here in Chicago at O'Hare Airport. I flew in here early this morning because I'm embarking on this journey. Tomorrow morning I head to the consulate, the Mexican consulate here in Chicago, to get a visa because the only passport I have is a Philippine passport, and I need a visa to travel from America to Mexico, specifically Tijuana, so I can apply for this waiver. We'll see how this goes. Everybody thinks I'm Mexican anyway, because of my name and because I'm undocumented, which is awful. So why not go to Mexico? And I can't wait to see Mexico.
On Christmas night, for the first time since arriving in California on August 3rd, 1993, I left the United States, crossing the border into Mexico.
Okay, here we go.
Gabby accompanied me, and we were driven from San Diego to Tijuana by our mutual friend Chris.
Wait, so like what's gonna happen now?
Curve right, curve left, then we'll be in Wilmington.
Here we go. We're gonna cross this thing. Is there even people in there, or? Wait. Jesus.
Bienvenido a Mexico.
We're in Mexico?
Okay. What?
That's it.
That's it.
But you know, I flew to Chicago to get this fucking visa. Is no one going to check it?
No.
Tijuana!
We arrived in Tijuana at around 9 p.m. 12 hours later, I was scheduled to be interviewed in the U.S. consulate. I didn't sleep. I couldn't sleep. I'm not sure nervous is enough of a word to describe what I was feeling. I came to the consulate with a stack of documents, taxes I'd paid, because, you know, undocumented immigrants pay taxes, my college transcript from San Francisco State University, a list of my accomplishments and contributions, letters about my character from my choir teacher, Jill, my high school principal and superintendent, Pat and Rich, my cousin and best friend, Gladys. Absent was any piece of technology, including my iPhone, which I was not allowed to bring inside the building. Inside was a cavernous space with numerous service booths, like a massive bank or DMV, with lines of people waiting and talking into booths. I was assigned to booth 33. For about 45 minutes that felt like 4 to 5 hours, in a very public, open space, I was grilled about my life, all aspects of it, by a nameless officer who parsed every one of my responses. Did you have a visa when you entered the United States? I don't know. I never saw any documents. I was 12. Have you ever left the United States? Coming to this interview, I said, was the first time I left the US. Are you aware of the reasons why you are inadmissible? Yes. Based on what my lawyers have explained to me, I am inadmissible due to a 10-year bar that was triggered when I departed the US to come to this interview, and due to falsely claiming to be a US citizen for work purposes. If your waiver is denied, where will you go? I have a family in the Philippines and possible employment opportunities outside of the US. We stood the whole time. Towards the end, as he gathered my documents, he said, "You've been living in the US for 30 years. Why should we now believe that you will comply with the terms of this visa, that you'd leave after the visa expires?" The visa expires in 3 years. I took a breath and replied, "Now, I could have stayed in the US without status. However, I am 43 years old and want to show the US government, the government I've been paying taxes to, in a country where I built my life, that I'm interested in following immigration laws. I intend to honor this visa."
I had my interview at the consulate in Tijuana, the U.S. consulate in Tijuana was that yesterday? Yesterday, Thursday. And then they told me that I probably won't be hearing back till Monday, so I decided to fly to Mexico City. As I'm here at the airport, I'm here at the Mexico City airport. It's actually a beautiful airport. I saw a young boy with his mom and looking excited and a little confused but excited, curious, all those things. Probably, 10, 11. I was 12. And I just was reminded of what that feeling was like. And it was such a blur, the whole thing, I don't remember. And so I promised that I'm going to remember everything about this flight. I'm going to leave Mexico City until Sunday night, so 2.5 days. Oh, it is. Yeah, about that. And I am going to savor and enjoy every minute of it.
Upon arriving in Mexico City, whose streets were the closest reminder I have of Manila, all the emotions I've contained in the past few months just came flooding out. All I had were questions. Was I ready to leave the place I called home? What is home? What if I don't want to return to the US? Who and what am I without America? What if American citizenship is no longer my goal? I grilled myself for 48 hours, literally. It felt exciting and scary, enlightening and disorienting. And I realized whatever happens, whether the D3 waiver is denied, whether I'm worthy of approval from the US, my work is global. I want to tell the stories of how the world's migrants, whom we call immigrants here in the US, are reshaping and redefining what we call the Western world. My O visa was approved on December 30, 2024. After 31 years, 4 months, and 28 days of living in the United States, 11,473 days, I counted, I was finally documented. My O visa is not a green card. It does not make me a permanent resident. It does not even put me on the path to US citizenship. But it can be renewed, which I hope to do. That night, 31 years after I last entered the United States, I entered the United States again. A few months after she asked me to consider taking this big gamble, it was only fitting that I entered the US sitting in the cramped back seat of a car next to Moni. She flew in from Chicago and called her brother, Jesus, who lived nearby. Imagine this, the four of us in a compact Volkswagen. I'm in the back with Moni, her brother Jesus, and his wife Adriana in the front. And the Border Patrol agent is looking at this visa, kept batting his eye and was very confused because the visa had all of these numbers and all of these codes, including the code that waives my 10-year bar, the code that waives my false claim to citizenship. He asked if I was a musician. No. And then he kept looking at it. And finally, a few really uncomfortable minutes later, he let me in. Over dinner, Jesus asked, "Now, how will you deal with this change of identity, that you're no longer undocumented?" I shared what I believe. Being undocumented is not an identity. It's a condition. More than anything else, more than being gay, more than being Filipino, I identify as a journalist. Being a journalist is how I make sense of the world around me and my place in it. And I cannot think of a more crucial time to be a journalist, chronicling this defining issue of immigration. I was lucky enough to make my way through this obstacle course with the help of so many, Gabby, Moni, Jesus, all of these people. And right now, we know there are millions of people and countless families living in fear and uncertainty. Please know I am with you, and my work is with you. When I returned to my home in Northern California, where I grew up, on New Year's Eve, Gladys and my dear friend Elise had organized a surprise party with my closest friends. I didn't realize how happy I was to be home until I saw the joy on their faces. Peter Pearl, my mentor from my reporting days at the Washington Post, I met him 20 years ago. He was one of the very first people I trusted with my immigration status. He was ecstatic, unbelievable. He said, "Too good to be true." Their reactions confirmed to me that the United States of America is where I should be. I am home. As complicated and complicating and painful and beautiful as home is.
Okay, Kuya, come over here.
Gracias, Mexico.
Thank you, Mexico. Salamat, Mexico.
Oh, salamat, Mexico.
Okay, 1, 2, 3.
1, 2, 3.
Salamat, Mexico!
On New Year's Day, I shared the news with my immediate family. I had not told them, not even Lola, my 87-year-old grandmother who raised me. They were shocked and thrilled. "How could you leave without telling us?" someone asked. It would have been easier to say goodbye when I was already gone. Now, as a documented non-immigrant, temporary visa holders like me are not considered immigrants. Take that for how complex and nonsensical the US immigration system is. My work continues, and a big part of it is this show. Immigration is a defining issue of our time. So let's define it together. And before jumping into easy answers, which we like to do, let's make sure we're asking and exploring and facing all the questions. Our country's current immigration system is family-based. People already here in the US who have green cards or are US citizens are able to bring their closest relatives, although even that often takes 20 or more years. It's also merit-based visas for the benefit of US employers. Should that two-prong approach continue? What is the optimal immigration system given our history and our needs? Are there other ways to think about all of this? Where do our country's estimated 48 million immigrants and their descendants, mostly coming from Asia, Latin America, Africa, and the Caribbean, where do they fit in this country's foundational black or white racial binary? The incoming Trump administration promises a deportation machine unlike anything in modern US history. How will you respond when your classmates, your coworkers, your neighbors are detained and deported? How do you define American?